Hey everyone, Yui here, and I'm back with another audio commentary, this time for Ridley Scott's 1985 movie Legend, the theatrical cut, which is my preferred cut, and we'll explain why during the commentary. You can listen to this as a podcast, or you can sync it up with your own copy of the film. We've got a version that's 1 hour, 29 minutes, and 36 seconds, so you'll just hit play at the same time as us and watch it together. I got my friend Tomo here, and we're just gonna fucking get into it.
Get into it.
Hell yeah! All right, 3, 2, 1, go. This fucking movie.
Here we go.
So,
Exciting.
what's your relationship with this film?
I've mentioned before that my Ridley Scott lineage is owed quite in large part to my mum, who's a big Ridley stan and has been forever. And she's kind of been like the vanguard for Ridley films, which basically no one likes, like Black Rain. And there were two
Yeah, she's a big
strong
Exodus apologist.
yeah. But there were two like fantasy VHS which sort of occupied our kind of Saturday daytime watching a lot when I was very young. And it was this film and Willow, if anyone remembers Ron Howard's Willow. Sort of very traditional kind of fantasy, 80s fantasy fare. But obviously the version I was am most familiar with was the kind of European version, which is I suppose the different cuts of the international cut and the director's cut. And I don't think they were available in the US until really early 2000s. So
Yeah,
I never understood that there was this distinction between the two. For example, this whole opening crawl is like non-existent in the
yes. So,
European. And yeah, it's
yeah,
like
what
half
what
an hour
Ridley
long.
said in specific, I think, and I quote. Uh, Scott said, European audiences are more sophisticated. They accepted preambles and subtleties, whereas the US goes for a much broader stroke, which means a title crawl, um, which I'm okay with. It's not really needed
Yeah,
in a film like this. Like, the director's doesn't have it. And honestly, yeah, it's fine without it.
yeah,
But yeah, so already we're hearing the different score. The director's cut
yeah,
has the director's cut has Jerry Goldsmith, who does a
yeah,
very lush orchestral
yeah.
score, and then the theatrical, which is the American version,
Mm.
has the um, weird new agey tones of Tangerine Dream.
Which apparently
Uh,
they wrote in 3 weeks. Like they were doing this cut for the US release, and
yeah,
they had to replace the score last minute. They did this
yeah,
whole film in
that's
3 weeks,
Gonzo,
which
by the way. That's
is
fucking crazy.
crazy. That is out of control. I feel like so I watched in preparation for this. I had never seen the US version, and I wanted to watch it just to because it's half an hour's difference. So to me, that's like night and day. That's like Kingdom of Heaven theatrical versus
Yes.
Kingdom of Heaven. That's like completely different. But the thing I noticed, I felt most about this version watching it is that it is not ostensibly too different. Like the images are kind of the same. They're sort of in the same place. There's a lot of omissions which feel kind of just what this feels like to me is this is almost like the arcade version of the kind of console version that is
Oh, I see what you
the
mean.
theatrical cut. I think that's probably quite an apt analogy for this specific type of film. But it's like this feels like the leaner, we've just got to like get on with it kind of thing. But the things that I'm really kind of attached to about this film are all still there, with the exception of the Jerry Goldsmith score, because it's just one of those personal preference things. That's the one I know, and I just kind of know
Oh
it really
yeah.
well. And
Oh
I'm just,
god.
yeah.
Look at this.
Oh,
What the
so
hell is this?
this is so not PG. This is like,
So yeah, some of the stuff is framed a bit differently.
yeah, you never
Like
see darkness at all in the director's cut until like much later in
yeah,
the film.
much
So
later. So it's
this
much more
day glow
dramatic.
shit is like this really threw me for a loop just seeing him like this early on. But here he is in all his glory.
God, the colors in this
Yeah.
fucking nuts. Um,
It's something. Sorry, yeah. Tell me
so
about your relationship with this film.
yeah, I mean, I didn't watch this as a kid. And coming to it as an adult, I kind of it's kind of strange because I just consider like, oh, this is one of those '80s like kids fantasy movies. But then watching it, I remembered like all these movies are really fucked up
Yeah.
and just like horrifying. Um, yeah, this I mean like, this whole opening where it's like you see a guy getting like chopped up on a butcher's block in like the middle of hell.
Yeah.
um, it's just what you want to see. It's wonderful. Like
It's,
this is the kind of movie that like you watch as a kid and like it kind of scars you for life, but in a good way.
yeah, completely. In a really good way, I feel. Like, just the imagery is so strong. I mean, like, really taken as an adult, there is nothing narratively sort of sumptuous here, but that's never really important anyway. Like, I think, and that's like the ultimate really trope is just he's going to bypass any contrivance that a story is going to put upon him in pursuit of just like incredibly, overwhelmingly lush, strong imagery. Like almost to a fault. I mean, some people would argue to a fault. I think there's just so much in here that, and I think that's why you can have a cut that is half an hour's difference and not lose anything in essence. Like because the imagery is so sincere in its kind of detail that you can cut it almost any way as long as you're sort of following what was vaguely outlined, and you still end up in the same kind of place.
Yeah, and also the story is like I think deliberately painted in such broad mythological Joseph Campbell esque strokes that
Mm,
um, you can minimize it, maximize it, whatever, right? Like it
mm.
doesn't. You can zoom in and out of certain qualities, and yeah, the essential bits still remain. Um,
Yeah.
oh God, this
So this is
fucking
all like sound stages. This shit is just
yeah.
like, how do
This
you even?
stuff
Who would even
is
build this now? Like only
insane.
Ridley could do this.
Look at
To do this as
this.
set. And again, similar to Blade Runner, there's like very specific layering in the images. Like you have like eh, there's a very common thing now, which is just whatever is in the foreground of like modern cinema that nothing else is given attention to, but really is like he's going to light a person a certain way, but he's going to put shit in front of their face as well, and he's going to put elements that move. Like there's always something to look at. Like even if he holds a shot for like 3 seconds or like 30 seconds or whatever, there's just always something in it that's like you don't notice the first time.
Yeah, well, I mean, you look at this; it all looks like a fucking like a William Morris design, or like it's
Yeah,
so absurdly intricate, and
yeah,
I don't. Yeah, like just films have never looked like this. I don't know
no,
what film does. I mean, if anyone knows a film that looks like Legend, let me know
yeah, I
because
want
maybe I
it.
haven't seen it. Yeah, I want it. I mean,
Yeah,
this just it just looks impossibly good. And it pisses me off because people at the time, like, if you read criticism of this movie, it's like people are like, yeah, it looks pretty, but it's like, oh, it looks pretty.
yeah,
You have the faintest
yeah,
conception of what cinema is about to become. You don't know
yeah.
what you're
How
about to
good you've got it.
lose, right?
Yeah,
Like, yeah, you just look at this and it's like the amount of detail and craft and production. I mean, this whole little clock, right? Look at how specific this clock looks, man.
yeah,
It's just like every curve of the production feels so specific, and like
yeah,
there's a very handmade quality to all this movie. Ridley in the
yeah,
commentary talks a lot about we didn't do this with any digital effects, and he's very proud of that, and I think he fucking should be, because yeah, him and his production design and the makeup artist, I mean, yeah, to me, like, this is like a high watermark of what like practical stuff can achieve. It
yeah,
truly doesn't get much better than this, I feel.
yeah. No, I 100% agree. I mean, it really is like what I find really interesting about this film is I think it's like one of the films that were in the Ridley canon that's like not at all acknowledged. Like no one kind of admits its no one wants to admit that it's good. No one really likes it. It doesn't
Well,
really have
because
the cult
it's a
following.
kids film, right? But it's
Yeah,
not though. Like it is, but it's more of like an abstract movie. Like
yeah,
I think it feels much more indebted to silent cinema, and it
yeah,
feels just it's so characteristically uh made with an emphasis on like the visuals themselves have to tell you what to feel,
yeah,
and you know, it's not that like where these other films don't have that, but this is like so much, it's so in that direction that I think a lot of
mm,
people put it off and they're like, oh well, it's, you know, quote unquote camp, which I don't really, you know, I don't really
yeah.
believe in. because
Mm.
I think
No, it doesn't really
because I think
fulfill the
Ridley
kind of
knew when he was making this, like he knew like, okay, I'm gonna make something that is, you know, mythological, that is this distillation of romances and medievalism and yeah, like romanticism. He just has the intention, but I think a lot of people look at that and they say like, oh, well, it's just stupid and naive. And it's like, well, naivete in art isn't necessarily stupid. This is not a
yeah.
naively made film, right?
No, no, no.
This is a film made
Very
by like
deliberate.
people who know what the fuck they're doing.
Yeah, completely. But it's interesting to me think looking at this film now and thinking about like it's a film that I feel is like incredibly influential, like unconsciously, but
Oh
again, a
yes.
film that no one will acknowledge as an influence, like on sort of, you know, not just the like visual language of like fantasy films and television sort of going forwards. I mean, I feel like this is the film that you would watch if you're making like a Lord of the Rings or whatever, and that you can pull things from and not feel guilty about it because no one, again, no one is really beholden to this film as like a, you know, a cult classic or a kind of lost gem. Even though I feel like it is all those things, and like video games throughout this is like kind of a blueprint for every like CD-ROM kind of
Oh
point and click
yes. Well,
adventure
especially
in
with the
terms of like,
Tangerine Dream score, it feels
yeah,
so much like
yeah.
like a CD-ROM video game.
Yeah. And this is supposedly like the kind of sort of turning point for where you end up with Zelda, which is like, and I mean, watching that now, you can see like all the sort of signifiers are there. Like you have kind of little woodland fairy boy, princess, kind of lush, grand, kind of fantasy landscapes out of, yeah, like the kind of William Morris artistic influence. And then there's like, and that's all that ends up what like a Zelda game ends up being, you know, like sort of ugly goblins. Like the visual stuff I feel is all really pulled into like games. So it's like mega influential on kind of the fantasy genre in a very, very unconscious way. Like it's not thought of as being like Blade Runner, everyone says is like the
Well,
big
because
influence
that's
on
a
like
serious film for
dystopian
adults, but
fiction.
people don't want to
Yeah.
consider the fact that just because this film is like again enduringly potent in an aesthetic sense, like they want to kind of chalk that up to being like, ah, well, whatever. Like I think there's a lot of like disavowed, uh you know, quote unquote, like a teenager's idea of like what maturity is. Look, if you
Mm,
watch this movie and you can't acknowledge the craft and the skill on display into making something like this, you know, like I
you
don't,
don't. You
you
shouldn't
just
be
don't
watching
have
the film.
any, you don't have an aesthetic sensibility. You just don't, you have don't have an appreciation for this. And
Yeah. You should be
man, like Tom Cruise in this movie,
yeah, he's so
he's just
young.
constantly just grinning, and his
Yeah.
eyes are so wide, and he does feel like a almost like a pure elf woodland Tarzan boy that just has like
Yeah.
emerged out of the ether.
I feel like this is such an excellently cast film as well. Like Tom Cruise is slightly, I mean, like again, it's one of those things that I feel like if you watch now, you're like, what the hell? But like at the time, everything about it makes like so much sense. Like I don't know if Mia Sara, if this is like pre or post Ferris Bueller, but she works as like this sort of double-edged, like she's the sort of innocent princess, sort of white as snow kind of thing, and then she does that kind of like Susie and the Banshee dark goth look
Yeah.
later on, and she kind of like she just that visually she looks great as both. And then like Tom Cruise, to think of him in this role is kind of weird, but at the time it would have made so much sense. And then I
Well,
mean Tim
I
Curry
think in
fucking
retrospect, I think it works better because this is one of only two fantasy movies he's ever done. He's done this and he's done Interview with the Vampire. I think
mm,
Interview is like arguably his best performance.
mm,
And this, you know, it does again. It takes skill to play a character who you know has like a much more raw way of expressing their emotions, and like it's not just like, oh, quote unquote bad acting, right?
Yeah.
Like I
Yeah,
very
yeah,
much
yeah.
disagree that like good acting is all this like psychological internalized bullshit. That's not what it
Yeah,
is.
no, that's
He communicates a lot of emotions in this movie, and
yeah.
yeah, I feel like he's good at really capturing uh what the camera's going for, and like how someone's eye moves, how their body moves, like
Mm,
like his body language in this movie is so interesting. He's always like kind of like crouching, he's like hunched over. Again, there is like a Tarzan quality to it.
yeah.
There's a lot of like, yeah, he just his physical acting is enormous.
He's very much like of the legacy of non like more like silent film stars than someone like a Brando in the sort of method kind of lineage. He's more like a he I mean, I know it's
Yeah,
said a lot. He
he
is like the
he he
Buster
does
Keaton.
have he does have some methody parts to him, but to me, it's never about like him really. Interestingly, like he's always playing
Yeah.
with surfaces as a performer.
Yeah. It's
Like
good.
with
He's
Brando, I always feel like it's a part of like some extension of a persona. But Cruz, he has a certain variety of personas that he shifts through. But I don't think,
mm,
in a sense, it's always about like, you know what I mean. It's not like about psychology in that way.
yeah, completely. And I
So
guess for a film
this
that
shit I adore.
sorry.
This shit is so
Yeah.
good. This is like, I just I love like with the Tangerine Dream score here. I love how it switches
Mm,
so easily between ethereal and wonderful, but also like being on the precipice of danger.
mm. Yeah, I mean this to me feels like if you're this is like almost if you watch it now, you feel like it's almost borderline spoof, but like again, this is just what really works in the fantasy genre. Like it's so arc and
Yes.
like um it's so kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Like classical in that sense.
Yeah, there's no room
Um
for like postmodern and cynical bullshit here.
yeah, exactly. I mean it's very pure. Not to be trite, but it's very pure.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of people who like have a pretension of not believing in that, and
Yeah.
they can go watch something else because this is not that movie. Uh,
And I mean, regardless of any of that, is like the again, like the imagery is so sincere. Like he treats, I think that's the key to really success is just as a kind of, a designer and an artist. Is he treats every image like an opportunity to kind of do something, and like accentuate something and be really kind of lush. And he doesn't do that like, ironically, he doesn't do that sort of
Well,
non-seriously. It's
he's
all
an artist who
treated.
believes in beauty. And I think a
Yeah,
lot of what this movie is about is the proximity of beauty to terror
yeah.
in the way that Alien also has this, Blade Runner does as well. I
Mm,
think in this period he's very interested in uh, the approximation of this like lush, overwhelming uh, aesthetic sensibility also being used to like immediately then like delve into your corruption and pure evil. It's like kind of like how it's like the purity of the unicorn is in a way not dissimilar to the purity of the evil represented by Tim Curry here.
yeah. No, completely.
See, now in the directors, this is much more played out in like
Yeah,
a straight dramatic way, but here it's like a montage. It feels much more frenzied. It feels much more
yeah,
dangerous. And like the way that her hair is tied to the branch, that's like a classic Ridley touch. Like you know that's like visual storytelling. You just want to, but like look at this, the montage with them running through the forest and like the clouds overhead.
cloud pudding, yeah.
It feels much more anxious,
Yeah,
um and I kind of prefer it because it does have it's like the world immediately switches into like something that's disturbing, and you go from this beautiful landscape, and then it transitions into like the winter comes and freezes over everything.
yeah. It's like I hate to use the word functional. I mean, that is initially what I felt about watching this cut for the first time, is that there was obviously a mandate, a studio mandate, that this needed to be shorter and it needed to be more like in the mold of a kind of 80s adventure cinema, and it needed just to work. But that still, and I think Ridley kind of went with that. But like he always does, is he kind of doesn't do that reluctantly. Like he's willing to go, yeah, let's just like
He's willing to play
work with
around.
this. Yeah, he's like, let's work with this. Like I think he has such faith in what he's putting out there that he can cut it. I mean, this isn't always true. Obviously, like Kingdom of Heaven is like the big exception to that. Like, um, but here it's like he knows how to play with that kind of restraint. He's
Well,
like,
and he's interested in making it not just a lesser version of the movie that he
yeah,
made, but a different version.
yeah. Which is like really key to just him as a director, like
Like the
just being
score. Look at the way
successful.
that the score rises,
Yeah,
and like it feels. It's like the yeah, and the constant use of the sky here too, which isn't in the directors at all. And
yeah,
like yeah, so much is like again, the shot lengths are so shorter in a theatrical. Like it does feel hallucinatory. Like it feels like,
yeah,
all right, what the hell am I watching? Like what's going on?
yeah. Um, like the Blossom here, I fucking like he's just putting it on everything. Is someone who knows how to do like more is more filmmaking, like just to layer sort of elements on top of each other without it becoming like nonsense, you know, like you've got
Yeah,
bubbles, and then it just cuts to like Blossom, and everything is just like particle, and it's just it should be almost complete garbage, but it's so incredible to look at, and it's
well,
I think
complete
just
garbage
very
doesn't
very
do that, right?
yeah,
See, but I love this bit. You don't get this in the directors, but like when he's fighting to break out of the ice, like you
yeah,
feel like just a terrible feeling of like foreboding. And then like
yeah,
when he finally breaks out and the unicorn's horn is cut off at the same time. I mean, that's you
yeah.
know, that's Eisenstein, man. That's pure cinema.
That's yeah, brilliant bit of editing.
Look at the all the particulates in the frame here. I remember
Yeah,
we also talked about this in Kingdom of Heaven with the snow, right? He does the same thing
yeah,
here. It just everything feels so dense. Even in the forest scenes where you would have like bits of I don't know what to call them, like fluff in the air or whatever, you
yeah,
know, just
yeah.
pollen. It almost feels like
Like the glitter budget on this film
yeah, the
must have
glitter
just been
budget. Yeah, well,
off
everyone's coated
the
in
fucking
glitter.
chain.
Tom
Yeah,
Cruise, he's got a bunch of glitter on his face, and I'm happy for him.
and that I again, that's like a unique, a kind of lost art of just like
Oh, the
layering
baby's
elements.
frozen.
Oh yeah, it's horrific. I mean, it's just a doll, but it's horrible. um, it's just like understanding a kind of elemental relationship in imagery, and like it's never too much. I don't really know how to kind of describe it. It's like you're going to go into a frozen house, and how are you going to show a frozen house? Obviously, it's not just literally people are frozen, it's just that everything is covered in frost and everything is like pure white, and it's like an
Yeah,
artistic mind working in kind of like cinematic form, you know.
yeah. I just watched the directors. I will admit that the color grading on the directors is, I think, better.
Yeah,
It's just more stark. Um,
yeah, bit of a better transfer.
yeah,
Yeah,
I don't even know because I guess he just didn't bother to update the theatrical when he was, you know, and that this is just the
doing the
kind of
remaster.
standard version.
Mm.
I there's another Blu-ray of this movie. Maybe that fixes it. Maybe not though.
Mm. Yeah, there's
So
the Arrow release, which is
these
like
three
really hardcore.
goblins.
Yeah.
I love these lads. These are good lads.
You see that in this new in the watching the US version is a really you focus on that stuff a bit more, like the relationship between the three of them, which I feel because the director's cut is so kind of padded out, you're sort of just like oscillating between like focusing on what's going on in inverted commas and like what is on the screen, like visually what's on the screen. So like it was fun just sort of honing like focusing on the relationship between like these sort of underlings and
Well, the director's cut
um
has more of them, but
yeah,
I feel like yeah, it's a bit more
it get kind of gets
shapeless.
lost. Yeah, it kind of just is a bit lost. This like flashing effect on her face, I just fucking love that stuff.
So good.
It's like the
Again,
sort
like
of
it's like the
shimmering in
snow
Blade
is
Runner.
everywhere.
Yeah. It's like that shimmering effect in the office in Blade Runner. It's like got no kind of like physical reason to be there, but it just looks great.
It
So
just
why
looks
not?
cool. I mean, it's
It
classic
just
like
looks
music
great.
video shit.
Yeah. It's interesting. I feel like if Ridley had come in like 20 years later, he would have been like, probably would have never made it to film. He would have just been like in music videos and been like, yeah, this is where I belong. This is like,
well,
he would have
well,
just like
thank God he didn't.
excelled. Yeah. No, but again, I feel like all this stuff is super influential on the idea of like an MTV star. Like I know it's talked about that Blade Runner is there is a very clear line between that film and like the lush, overproduced kind of music video style. But I feel like the same attitude is true here, and people don't really acknowledge it. But I know that this film sort of creeps into lots of different kind of fantasy literature that kind of came afterwards. But it's not an influence anyone really has to acknowledge because it doesn't have the
Well, it
kind
doesn't
of
have
same
prestige,
clout.
you know. It didn't win
Yeah,
Oscars, that kind of shit. Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
and it's never been quite reclaimed like the way that Blade Runner has been,
yeah,
which I think is unfortunate.
yeah. It should be. It absolutely should be on its own terms, really. Now, this is the shit I love because this is obviously you can quite clearly see it's just like a light on a bit of string, but it's such a good effect.
It's
Like
wonderful. It's
it's
truly
just like a
amazing.
great touch. And that I see the Zelda kind of through line there as well, because that's just like fairies
Yeah,
flying
I
over
think
you kind of thing.
this feels so much to me. Yeah, like video games, but I always see these types of movies like this and like Conan the Barbarian. It's like so
Mm,
classic Dungeons and Dragons core to me. Like it's
yeah,
you watch these, you watch Lord of the Rings, you watch Neverending Story. It feels so much like a D&D adventure, and I have complex issues with like D&D as a system, but like the whole
yeah.
vibe of like role playing with your friends and going through these fantasy worlds, it's something that is very endearing to me.
So I always like I always was really into fantasy as a genre, but I was always more attracted to, I guess you'd call this like sort of deep fantasy or like dark fantasy as opposed to like grand fantasy because I always
Oh, I think I
struggled
know what
with
you mean.
like classical fantasy that just stuck to a very specific mold that was rooted in like medieval kind of
Yeah,
you
the
know, the
romances.
Beowulf kind of thing. Yeah. Whereas I know this obviously has its roots in there as well, but there is a kind of, I don't know, there's a more like aberrant element here. Like I
Well,
suppose
there's a
there's
dark sexuality to this movie that we'll talk about
yeah.
later.
Yeah. But it's not like the kind of fantasy story that was always, I suppose, ostensibly very like a knight, a chivalrous knight, and then like just your sort of traditional goblins and elves, and like I don't know what the fuck the creatures in this film are. Like they're undefinable, you know. They're sort of called goblins, but they don't look
Well,
like goblins, and
yeah, it's much more iconoclastic. It's not following a mold.
yeah. But it does have its roots in like if you saw a kind of fantasy novel artwork of the
Oh
70s,
yeah, I mean, I
this
just
kind of
went and
stuff
bought a
is
bunch of them.
all
Yeah,
there.
it's all over this.
Oh,
Yeah.
really? Yeah. Um, so it's a more sort of grassroots fantasy, I guess, like not about societal kind of,
Well,
you
yeah,
know,
it's
an
like
overarching
purely
thing.
imminent. This is not trying to make a commentary on anything. It's not loaded with like thematic
Yeah.
imagery or anything. It's just so based on the purity of the mythological image.
Yeah.
Yeah, what you were referring to earlier, at least in the States, what it's generally referred to is the difference between like high fantasy versus sword and
Yeah.
sorcery,
Yeah. Yeah.
or like I don't know, it's like epic fantasy versus heroic fantasy, where epic fantasy is often focused on it's like Arthurian, right? It's not just about Arthur, it's
Mm,
about the
yes.
knights and it's about who's courting who, and Morgaine and Merlin and like all this. It's very grandiose, whereas heroic fantasy or sword and sorcery is much more about it's like Conan, like Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser. It's
Mm,
like much more like here's this individual hero who's like going throughout these trials, and there's a bit of it's like fantasy, but touched a little bit by like the Western genre. I think there's
mm.
there's much more of like a focus on individualism. And
Yeah.
also I think it's also inflected a lot more by horror. Uh,
Yes.
whereas like like Beowulf is not really a horror story.
Yeah.
The death of Arthur is not a horror story. Um, and this, yeah, I think this has a great mixture of all different types of fantasy
Yeah.
because it's got the lushness, but it's also got the darkness too, and they're both mixed and contrast together. And like the whole film is about light cannot exist without the dark and all that kind of shit.
Darkness. Yeah, it's interesting. Like I always, I was always attracted to the fantasy genre as being this idea of you will encounter things that you just won't have imagined. And then there was this sense that a lot of fantasy, at least fantasy I couldn't get into, and maybe this is just showing my ignorance at the time of the genre as a whole, but there just seemed to be wizards that always looked the same and goblins were always kind of drawn the
Yeah.
same. And that I guess that is just a kind of trapping of bad fantasy, like
Well,
unimaginative
there's like the
fantasy.
genreification of it, yeah. But yeah, all
Yeah.
the best fantasy in my mind is always the non-formulaic stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
Also,
But
there are
then
fantasy stories that don't have like mythological creatures, but they have a mythological feel, right?
yeah.
Like Conan, like there's no
Yeah.
elves in like Conan. There's just there's like Cthulhu monsters, but that's like a different thing. And I just
Yeah.
think like real fantasy, in a way like that's like the Lovecraft stories are fantasies, right?
Yeah.
There's
Totally.
more of a there's a to me it's always about romanticism and it's about the encounter with the sublime, right? The fantasy is
Yeah.
about, you know, the mundane encountering the sublime and
Mm.
the cosmic and the overwhelming. And if it doesn't have that, to me it's just not,
Yeah.
like it's just, you're just like, all right, elves and dwarves and whatever. It's like, all right, well, I can go buy a box of Lucky Charms at the grocery store and get fucking elves.
I can get fantasy in a bowl if I
Yeah,
need
yeah.
it.
Ugh.
I can get this in a bowl. Yeah, I think I completely agree. I think those were the things that always drew me to the genre. And at being, so into films as a kid, like there really wasn't that many. And like the 80s is kind of the only time where
Yeah, where it was in
I guess there
vogue.
was there was a kind of there's probably a whole socio-economic drive behind fantasy becoming like a thing. I think the 80s is a very superficially kind of predisposed era of time, where there was the kind of pathos of like the 70s and that sort of whole internal thing kind of burgeoning out of New Hollywood. Like 80s became much more kind of surface, which is kind of how you end up with like a Ridley infiltrating like an American
Yeah, yeah.
studio system. As someone who is thought of as being, having the best eye in the film world, it's like that is how you end up with not only like his films, but also like the Apple commercial, which was like the most expensive, most lavish, most incredibly overproduced like commercial in like the history of like visual media commercials. It's like that whole throwing the hammer into, I think it was something like 2 million for that at the time, which kind of, I don't know, with inflation is probably loads, but
Yeah, I
yeah, I
mean,
mean,
just for what it's
sorry.
worth, I mean, like, this film was also very expensive, so
Yeah.
it's like it really always puts that money to work. Thank God. I mean, look, he's about to call it Napoleon. He's like conning Netflix and giving like $250 million. It's
Yeah.
absurd. It's so good.
Yeah.
Love him.
Very excited.
Yeah. So like, I don't know. Like outside of this, like, are you into like do you read like fantasy books? Because I definitely do, and I'm getting back into it right now and just trying to like read all the classics. Like I just bought a copy of the Once and Future King, and like a while
Mhm.
ago, I read like the whole Arthurian saga, at least the main one, the Mallory version. And yeah, I love. I feel like science fiction and fantasy often get paired together. I think as time has gone on for me, I've more and more seen like I don't really think they're comparable. I think people
Mm.
try to make them comparable as like quote unquote genre fiction, whatever that is.
Yeah.
Uh, but it just doesn't. It's to me, it's like they have fundamentally different names, and often
Yeah.
when people try to mistake them for each other, like they're really just it's like there's mixtures, right? But like I think there's a fundamental like yeah, one is rooted in I think a conception of enlightenment politics and philosophy. Another I think is rooted in like the romantic reaction to that and medievalism
Mm.
and um, and mythology. And I mean, there's a lot of fantasy stories that are even like they go beyond medieval, and they're like, ancient Rome and Greece and Babylon, right? Like it's this much more historical, I think, like oriented like humanities version of a type of escapist story.
Yeah, totally. I mean, fantasy was always has always in my mind been sort of conceived as ostensibly a genre for like much younger audiences, like more impressionable audiences. So the
Yeah.
kind of I think the aims are different. There's a really great book called The Uses of Enchantment, which is all about, I think it was written in the 70s by a guy who claimed to be a psychologist, and then it turned out that he had only taken like three like classes in psychology. He was just like this massive liar, but he wrote this like very influential book about like the relationship to the fairy story and like how kids process the world and how they deal with like very heavy things in life like really early on. And I know that's not baked into kind of an author's intent for fantasy, but I think obviously that wherever its roots are obviously change at certain kind of points. Like obviously Lord of the Rings is like a big sort of like milestone that changes. But then like The Hobbit is a child story and always was a child story, and he kind of wrote it as such, and then he just went so much bigger with Lord of the Rings and just sort of
He
becomes
just
like
lost his mind.
he's just
Just
lost his mind.
it's
Went
like, no, it's
crazy.
not. It's not just what's his name? It's not just Sauron, but it's Melkor too. And you're like, who the
Yeah,
fuck is Melkor? And then you read it, and you're like, oh,
yeah,
Melkor's pretty badass, actually.
yeah. But that was like all very world building, like seriously world building.
Yeah, whereas this
Like
is
those
not, and I
novels.
enjoy that this isn't.
Yeah,
I enjoy that this
yeah.
isn't burdened by like, then so and
Needing
so,
to
and blah blah blah.
establish.
Like it's not narrative in that way.
Yeah. I think that's why I always love this film is it you don't just get swamped with because it doesn't have that opening crawl in the director's cut, so it wasn't kind of swamped by that need to understand. Like the signifiers are all so self-evident.
Yeah,
Like
you're
even
just
when
thrown
you're
into
quite
it.
young.
That's what I mean by
Yeah.
like naive art. Like you're just taken for what it is, and you're not meant to consider it in the context of like some grandiose set of like it's just pure symbol.
Totally. This sequence I love. This is like the hardest
Oh,
death in a
dude, this is
fantasy
the
film
fun. Like
ever.
I love this shit so much,
It's
dude.
so
When like
good.
a mummy just emerges from the ground,
Yeah.
grabs this guy who has like tried to like lead like a revolution or whatever. And he's just like, no, you're going into the abyss, my friend.
He just goes with him. It's great. He doesn't drop him in. He goes with him. It's like,
It's
I'm gonna
so
make
good.
sure this is absolutely like done. And that little wow is a nice touch. The fucking makeup in this film. I mean, yeah. The sort of I can't remember the name of the actor who's playing Blix, who's like the main goblin, but to act underneath like all that stuff really takes like a lot of work.
Yes.
And the voice is so strong as well, like distorted,
Well,
raspy kind
it's
of
like almost
quality.
all the voices in this movie, outside of Cruz and the princess, like they, like everyone has like it's all ADR, you know.
Yeah.
Oh, I love like the blues against the orange here,
Mhm.
unicorn there.
Yeah, that's very sort of classical. Like the way that you light a fire sort of outdoors is very key to how good your kind of fantasy art is going to be
I
because
agree.
it's a fireside genre, you know, it's like a
Well,
kind
you
of
think of was it Fellowship of the Ring when they go on top of I don't know, it's not even a mountain, it's like a weird little outcropping, and they make camp there, and then the Nazgul visit them.
yeah. Oh, it's the Weathertop. Is it Weathertop?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah. Yeah,
Uh,
I'd be
I'm
interested to
gonna need
see
to do
if
commentaries on those movies. It's gonna be such a pain in the ass.
what on all the Lord of the Rings.
Yeah,
Yeah, there's
fucking
no way
4 hours.
around.
Like at some
Yeah, there's
point, it's
no
just
way
gonna
around it.
like the listener's just gonna hear me like getting up and be like, "All right, I'm gonna go get a soda," and then I'll come back.
See, I
See, I
love
love
this
this
weird little
like they're
flair.
silhouetted in the
Yeah.
and the dark. Yeah, there's like road flares in this movie. I don't know
Yeah.
what it is. It's strange.
I was
Dude, I
watching
love
not
him
long
like
ago.
bouncing the arrows with his pan.
Yeah. He's still gonna get it. I was watching American Gangster quite recently, and this is a weird point to make, but it'll make sense. There's a moment in American Gangster where Russell Crowe's little team of cops. There's like the RZA from Wu-Tang Clan is one of
Mm-hmm.
his kind of guys, and there's a shot in it where you can quite blatantly, deliberately see like a Wu-Tang tattoo, like the Wu symbol on his arm
Uh-huh.
that has not been like removed at all. Like no, and I feel like there's no way like anyone would miss that, like making that film. But I feel like in a Ridley world, you have these things, you have very anachronistic touches, and that's the kind of shit he's not going to get bogged down in at all. Like
No.
recently, there was a story that came out that a historian was like picking all these things apart about Napoleon, and it's not even out. And his response was
Actually,
just, yeah. And his response was flat out, just like, get a fucking life and get out of my face. Like, I don't care about this. Like, he doesn't
it's
care
so
about
good.
accents. Like, you don't have to do, like, Mia Sara is American, but she's doing English. But Tom Cruise is like just doing his American accent. Like, there's no necessity. Nothing has helped. Like, authenticity is not high on Ridley's list of priorities. And I love that. Like, that's like one of my
Well, I
favorite things
I
about
think he
him.
makes the due effort to, do research. Like I think he tries. There's no I think he does a lot of work, but I think he
Yeah.
has no room for the people who that's the only thing they care about.
Yeah,
Where
he's not
it's
going to get stopped in his tracks by like a detail that's going to stop him from doing a thing he wants to do.
yeah, he's like, "Oh, I'm gonna do what I can, and then everything else is the demands of art."
Mm. This fucking set is like this must be a model. The darkness kind of um house, the castle, but it's fucking unbelievable. This like swamp section goes on like way longer in the director's cut as well.
Yes.
Which I kind of like. They're like it's Robert Picardo, who for anyone who's into like Star Trek is the Doctor in Voyager, and he's such a great character actor. Um, and it is an indulgence to have the kind of Meg Mucklebones Swamp Lady in it for as long as it is in the director's cut, but I really enjoy it.
Oh, who
'Cause he's such a
cares?
good
Come
actor.
on, come on. You make the whole thing. That's what
Well, I
you.
mean,
That's why you make the thing.
in this one, as we're about to see, she shows up and it's just like yuck, and then she's gone.
Yeah, he's just like ew and just get rid
Yeah.
of that fucker.
But there's this whole great kind of sequence in the director's cut of like Tom Cruise having to like do a bit of like riddle work to confuse her
Oh
into
yeah, he uses
uh,
the shield as a mirror to distract her.
yeah, he like softens her so that she'll then he can like kill her.
I love the way that light bounces off his male
His
armor.
armor. Yeah.
It creates such a dense image where you have like blues and yellows and oranges.
Like it's a very I mean, this is really what we talk about a lot, the sort of the neo-expressionist thing. This is almost like
Oh
kind of
yeah,
the pinnacle of it, is that the studio
this
kind
is
of
overload.
lighting. Yeah, it's a lot. The sort of studio lighting, the artifice elements are not hidden away. Like it's
No,
just that's part of the
well, no, and
film.
everything feels hermetically sealed. And there's no like
Yeah,
air in this movie. There's no naturalism, not really. There's like a couple shots, but like they're kind of indistinguishable from the others, and
yeah,
it just all feels so enveloped in this this like the world of the subconscious in a way.
yeah,
I love this bit where he's like, "Oh, I actually did it." Like he swings the sword a
yeah.
little bit.
That for me is the kind of the split between like the arcade version of Legend, like the console
Yeah,
version of Legend, i.e. the director's cut, is going through the sort of psychological rigmarole of him working out a riddle that's going to confuse. Like, but this is
well,
just like Tom
Tomo, I'll
Cruise.
just say Americans are too dumb for that. I just want to see the guy who's with a sword.
But
Ooh.
that's the thing is like the arcade version is like Tom Cruise presses a button enough times to kill the swamp
Oh,
lady,
what
and
was
that's
that
kind of it.
video game? Do you know what I'm talking about? There was like a video game where it's like exactly that. It's not Dungeon Quest. It's oh, there's some. It's like a FMV game. I forget what it was. Fuck.
Oh, like a Don Bluth kind of thing or something.
Yes.
There's like
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Those
Oh, I
ones.
don't know what that
He had
is.
like loads. There's like the
Yeah.
Space Ace ones, which were like, I mean, they're
Yeah.
very
It's
kind of
definitely
dark
adjacent to
stuff.
that. So do you think like Ridley was like, "All right, Tom, you're not gonna be wearing any pants this movie"? And Tom was like, "Sure. Yeah. Let's
I
do
it
it."
never occurred to me ever that like that sequence earlier when he's just sleeping in the snow, like wearing what he's wearing now, and that's like okay, so he's not going to freeze to death because he's by the fire, but he's still going to be like, like these things again. It's like don't worry about it, like don't think about this. Like we get so fucking. I mean, we're so wrapped up in the legitimacy of um kind of film story now. Like it has to make sense, and I don't know. You lose something, you definitely lose something. And it annoys me that I think about these things now instead of just being like, well, it looks nice and it's very much a
No, no,
fantasy. So
okay, okay. Well, frankly, you can have both. You can have both. There's no reason
yeah,
you can't have both. Yeah,
there is a blend somewhere.
yeah. Oh, dude. Okay, this whole underground sequence, all this shit. Okay, viewer, listener, if you watch this fucking movie, look at this entire sequence underground and
Mm.
tell me this is not like a huge influence on Dark Souls. It
Oh
feels
yeah.
like
Oh,
Dark
completely.
Souls so much because you got the big guys thundering around and like they got like the weird crazy masks and they look like these huge
Mm.
butchers. It feels like the that part in the first game where you're in in like the undead
What's it
burg and then
called?
you go underground
Yeah.
and like you're just like, oh, I'm in hell. And like there's just nothing but stairs and like fires and just like
Yeah.
all this ephemera down there.
What's the like boggy, swampy shithole area in the first one? It's I can never fucking remember the name. Ah, doesn't matter. It's not relevant. But then you got Silent Hill Pyramid Head dude, like just show up. Like the main butcher guy, and he's just got this like insane hood on.
Oh, the sound of the creatures too. It's so grotesque.
Yeah,
It is actually scary.
it's horrifying, blood curdling sound. Yeah, I always love the sound design, the sort of weird textures in Ridley films. Like I think about in Blade Runner when Harrison Ford's about to fall to his death and like Rutger Hauer like grabs him, but he lets out this kind of weird little like
Yeah,
sort of
like a
strained
yelp.
kind of noise. And it's not like a stock like Wilhelm scream. It's like it's sort of like it's obviously audio that's taken from another scene, I think, and put in there. But it really, I don't know, it really works. It's like it's so unexpected and just feels like awkward in a way that's very like real. And I know obviously that's the same logic can't really be attached to here, but I love the attention to just like strange, idiosyncratic kind of sound design. And there's a really specific moment in this film, like later, which I'll point out. Um,
Yeah, there's a bunch more
like,
preamble stuff before they when they go down here. That's just not in the
yeah,
theatrical.
yeah, that stuff. I mean, is like not that. I'm not missing that. Like
You know, as I'm watching this, you know what? I'm kind of changing my mind. I'm kind of changing my mind. I think that I actually prefer the director's now that I've seen
oh,
it.
really?
I don't know. Yeah, I'm starting to feel it, man.
Interesting. It's like bubbles in the air. Like
I don't know, man. When you go in like your underground hell dungeon, do you find bubbles?
bubbles will be there. At some point, the mainstream movie audience need to accept that their demonic hellscapes are gonna have bubbles in them. That's just a reality they need to confront.
Oh my god, like this score that down,
Mm,
dude. There's if you, I have a bunch of CDs of like new age music that would like play in bookshops and stuff. It
yeah,
sounds so
I love
much
that
like
stuff.
this. It's it's funny because like now like it's like I feel like people look at that shit now as if it's like the 70s and 80s version of exotica music. I think it's much
Mm.
better. I think it's much
Oh yeah,
more
no, I've
there's a
always
lot
loved
more
that.
artistic integrity just because it's so it's like you got like pan flutes and
Mm.
like I don't know, like Tangerine Dream is some of the best to ever do it. Just listening to this, I
I
adore.
it's I have to confess that I never had I've yet to have a moment with Tangerine Dream. Like it's not again, it's not that it's like not for me because I love like Vangelis and obviously like new age music broadly. Like there's a whole kind of substrata of sort of Japanese new age music that came out in the 90s, which I'm like really obsessed with. But like I've yet to have like a breakthrough moment with Tangerine Dream. So um
Yeah, well, we're
yeah.
gonna throw you into the dungeon. Sorry,
Well,
Tomo, it's
yeah,
happening
that's fine. Throw me
down
into the
here.
new age dungeon where there's
we're
bubbles
gonna
floating around.
we're gonna trap you here.
That's fine. I accept it. Every shot, almost every shot of this sprite woman where she's like full close up, there is just someone off screen just powdering glitter in front of her face, and that's like
Yeah,
that's the
throw
shit to
more
me.
of it.
That's like get it.
Every movie should just be covered in glitter, in my eyes.
It's like people really give Batman and Robin like a fucking hard time, and it is not a good film, but it does have a very specific commitment to just like how much glow in the dark paint it's going to put on everything. And for that and that alone, I would rather watch that than like I don't know, like the worst of the kind of DC or Marvel kind of I can't think the worst Batman movie. Maybe it is the worst Batman movie, but there's something about like committing sin in production design and doing it with such kind of heresy that I'm really sort of in love with.
Yeah, and also I think it's easier to appreciate this stuff now that it no longer really exists.
Mm,
You can look back and you're not enraptured in the moment of being like, oh,
yeah.
I'm sick of this. Like you can be like, oh, well, this is actually rarer than it was seen at the time. See, like this whole like clockwork like mechanism, like this how this place is kind of like a underground hell factory. It does feel so much like Dark Souls. I used to have
Definitely.
these terrible dreams as a kid where I would like open up a door somewhere and then like inside the door was like an underground facility and I would just like go down there and like walk around forever and there was no
Mm,
people. It was just like a
wow.
terrible industrial factory like full of rust and just like it was just a fucking nightmare place. And I always like had this extreme vision of like once you go underground, like you could find these places where it's um like Lord of the Rings also has this too, where you go
Yeah.
into like the pits of Saruman's lair, and there's all the orcs hanging around.
I think that's like for me the fundamental appeal of fantasy is, and I know it's very trite, but it's like literally going into the unknown. It's like you're gonna go somewhere and you have no preconceptions of what you're gonna see. It's like abstract almost, which a lot of this film is. And I know it's rooted in sort of fantasy art, but I feel like fantasy art was an expression of like an adventure where you'd go to sort of like settings you'd recognize in as much as they're like castles or dungeons. There's a precedent for that, but what is in them is like completely like this shit. It's this whole room. Like,
How did they do
what is the
this?
function of this room? Like, this is just to be like
Yeah.
looked at. This is
Well,
just
it's
to
like the
be
merging of a
relic.
mental space with a physical space.
Yeah. But the mental space is like deliberately meant to be this is something you've never seen before. Like this is so
I
out
love
of this
how
world.
the pillars, like if you look closely, they're covered in glitter. They're just
Yeah.
so like moist.
Yeah. Coated in that shit. So
Dude,
that
okay,
now
how did
this
they construct this? Like, I'm I'm legitimately wondering, like, Ridley, how did you make this? Like, how does this stuff? It's just so huge. It's
Yeah,
enormous.
yeah.
And it doesn't seem to be a lot of optical stuff. It just feels like it's just these
No,
huge sound
just
stages.
huge sets, yeah. Which it almost definitely is. These doors as well, like the doors on the
Oh
like the
yeah, I'm a
design
big
is
fan. We need to bring this back. Like just building huge doors that like
yeah.
no human being, like it's like twice the size of a
Yeah.
tall person, but you just open and close them. I love that stuff. It reminds me of
Oh, yeah.
like Roger Gusher's house or something.
Mm.
Yeah, see,
Now this
this is like D&D shit, This
yeah.
is the pure dungeon. There's just a bunch of ruins everywhere.
Yeah, dank kind of goes. This again, I know I keep saying this, but this feels to me like along the way, people who develop kind of fantasy genre in any form, like whether it's tabletop game or video game, are probably unconsciously pulling images from here because they're the strongest ones out there and sort of bringing them into that genre, and then they become perpetuated to the point where they become
It
common.
becomes a stereotype, yeah.
Yeah. And I do think, again, this may be just my immense ignorance about the genre, like historically, but I do feel like there is so much in this film that is the sort of the seed of all of that. Um,
Well, I think it's both a summation of what came before and an extension into the
mm,
future. I mean, I think a lot of the problem with fantasy fiction now is that so much of it is like tries that in this half-assed way to be quote unquote postmodern and to be like this and that and like I don't know. Surely there's room for that stuff, but I'm always more interested in like when I read like the works of like Robert E. Howard or Lord
mm,
Dunsany, what I like is the texture and the poetic style of like reading something that feels archaic and feels like it's evoking a mysterious place. I love, the made up terms for the cities and just the total
mm,
evocation of like this is a fragment of a world that only exists via the medium that it's made in, right?
yeah,
It's like
yeah, yeah,
the
yeah,
movie Legend is a missive from the world that Legend exists in, right? This is a
yeah,
like an artistic fragment of an
yeah,
alternate dimension in some ways. And I feel like the best fantasy stories really do capture that vibe of like, oh, like you're entering into a zone and uh the zone it is beautiful and it will destroy you and you cannot stay here, but you can stay here for a time. And
yeah.
like I think a lot of fantasy stories really rely on a sense of both melancholia and wonder and all these attached expressions.
I think that's probably the best summation of the appeal of not only the genre but this film specifically. Yeah, I think that's the best way of. I do have to say, like, quite strongly that in the this whole sequence in the director's cut is not only like so much better, but is like one of my favorite bits of Ridley like ever. Just the
Yeah, you know
waltz
what?
sequence.
I think I'm doing a 180. The director's is better. Sorry, guys. It's happening. I like how like
I
we're commentating on the theatrical. I'm like, actually, we should have done the directors.
we
So
got double
stupid.
up. But like this whole sequence is great as is, and the music is really good. But like the waltz sequence that Jerry Goldsmith does is amazing, and the way that this scene is cut is like just in another league entirely. Like it is just one of Ridley's best moments. That whole scene is just done
Yeah, see with the
just
darkness
brilliantly.
too, the color rating is a lot better than the
Yeah,
director's. It looks better because it does feel like this character is a
pitch black.
void.
Yeah, I love this design of this like sort of phantom kind of just giant fuck off collar, it's like, yeah, that's the stuff I love. Like just really exaggerate. It's like, Yoshitaka Amano, the designer who is like one of my favorite illustrators, and he does the designs for like Final Fantasy games,
Yes,
like the
yeah,
sort of character design,
infamously. Yeah,
and
beautiful artist.
very, very line heavy. Like the character designs are always
Oh,
their
very delicate
clothing.
lines too.
Yeah, like very accentuated, like sort of where lines on a body shape would usually or like lines on a costume would usually stop. They go so much further, and I love that kind of detail. And this costume is just, I feel
Yeah,
like
to
evokes
me
that
it,
really
it
well.
feels very Aubrey Beardsley. like
Yeah.
the just the
Yeah, yeah,
pure
yeah.
like stark, like this like version of arch decadence, right? Oh,
You can
this
tell.
image right here with the hand coming through. How
Yeah,
did
it's
they
very
do this?
Cocteau.
This is unreal.
I
It
think
looks so good.
this is really rooted in like the Cocteau fantasy, like the kind of Bella Labette, Beauty and the Beast, because that like mirror imagery is something Cocteau does a lot, and I know for a fact that that was a big influence on Ridley for this film is Bella and the Bet, and because Cocteau was obviously like 40s and not of an era of any kind of precedent for optical effects, he used like mirrors a
Yeah,
lot.
well, he's kind of he exists on his own terms. He's not really a
This
part of like a tradition.
that shot of him leaning over her like from the side, it just blows my fucking mind every time. It's just like with his giant fucking cape just like billowing in the wind. Oh, voice, it's chills.
What I love is that he's all like oiled up too.
It's such a horny film. Like really pushing it
Oh, you look at the
for
background, you
PG.
have all these like demon statues
Oh, there's
everywhere in this
gargoyles.
movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, it feels like fucking like a William Blake drawing. Like
Yeah,
there's
it
something
really does.
so
Yeah.
grotesque and extreme about it.
Yeah. That chair as well. It's just like he really must punish his art department just to get the level of kind of detail in
Yeah, well.
everything. But it shows, it's like it lives on so much further than a film that would just take this story and just play it straight. Like that would
Yeah, I mean, I would
immediately
compare
like
this to a movie like Neverending Story. Neverending Story is a
yeah,
fine movie. No disrespect to it. It's pretty well directed. Looks great.
yeah,
I don't think it has what this has. Right? This has. I mean, even more than like Star Wars or any of those other types of like movies that
yeah,
rely heavily on like archetypes. To me, this is like a movie of pure archetype. There's
yeah,
there's nothing, there's no semblance of realism here, which I love. I'm like, fuck, I wish more movies were like this.
yeah. Yeah, I feel like Never Ending Story, my memory on it is a bit but it's a little bit more
I mean,
proscenium. Like
well,
it's
yeah,
just a
well,
bit more
what I got pissed by is that the fucking story ended, man. Goddamn line title.
that was real bullshit. That was utter like that must have been that can't have been test screened for that to have gone through.
Hey, do you want
Like
to hear something beautiful?
always. A cameo. Is that Tim
Yes, that's
Curry?
my boy. No,
Is Tim Curry with you right now?
no, that's my cat.
Excellent.
He's sitting here chilling, watching Tom
Watching
Cruise and
some
his
Ridley.
glittery eyes.
Yeah. Well, it can't all be treats and, petting. You've got to put them through the Ridleys.
Put them through the Ridleys. See, look at all the chains and stuff. Ridley loves chains. He loves chains hanging through the
Yeah.
ceiling.
I would bet any money that Ridley fucks with Dark Souls. I reckon he's played a
No,
bit of
Ridley's never played a video game in his life. He doesn't know
no,
what a video
no.
game is.
I'm telling you, he's played Elden Ring.
There's there's no
He's
way.
he's
Ridley
platinum.
doesn't know what a video game is.
No,
My man is 83 years old or whatever. He does
yeah.
not know.
He would not let that stop him. He's all over fucking Elden Ring. He's platinumed it.
No.
He's done pre-patch
He's too
what's that
busy
guy?
making movies. He doesn't have time to play a Soulsborne game.
No, I'm kidding. But if he was if Elden Ring had come out 50 years ago, he would have been all about that shit.
Oh, you know who needs to make a Dark Souls movie? Fucking
Who's
Paul
that?
W.S. Anderson. He needs to make one.
That would be pretty awesome.
I think he would
Um,
rock it.
he would really. He's ready for it. Like maybe that's his late style, is doing the kind
Yeah,
of
late style. Yeah, he returns to the gothic.
more regarded. Yeah, this fucking like sub boss right here. This like pyramid head butcher guy, and his gigantic block of cheese.
Yeah, this is where I'm going to put you for your crimes against new age music. I'm going to put you in the pot.
In the giant pie. That's fine. A fair enough fate for someone as deviant as me. See, it's fine. You're just sitting in uncooked fruit with live birds. Nothing wrong with that. If it was a stew, I'd be concerned.
You know, I think this movie, if you want to make a case study of like what the difference between early style and late style is, compare this movie to like a movie that Ridley would make now.
Mm,
Yeah, I think he has really. When I say evolved as an artist, I don't think evolution necessarily implies like progress. I think there are different virtues for each, but I don't know. I because this is like so rooted in a time and a place. Like
mm,
it's like a nostalgia thing to be like, but what if a movie like could exist like this now? There are movies that are in this spirit, but not really. And
mm.
I, I doubt that Ridley's like in a place to make something this deliberately overproduced and naive again.
Yeah.
Um, I kind of because it's like this whole impulse of his, this desire to create these worlds, it just got entirely funneled into his historical movies,
Yeah.
which is great, and I love those. But I don't know. I feel like this and Blade Runner both not making that much money really put Ridley in a bad place and put him on a different path than
Yeah.
where he could have been. You know what I mean? Like Ridley could have been like the sci-fi fantasy guy, and to a certain
Yeah.
extent he is the sci-fi guy, but like not. I think there was a timeline where he could have been exclusively that, and he would have
Mm,
never made his historical movies or made his military movies.
yeah.
And yeah, it's just interesting how like the mixed reception to Blade Runner in this really put him in a different place as an artist, where um, I think he became much more commercial, both in good and bad ways.
Yeah. I mean, he talks about in the making of this that he was thinking specifically about wanting to make a film that was modern day with modern day characters and modern day concerns, and that he had to get this done before he could do that. So he had to do this. So I almost feel like he's not like artistically concerned with just like with that at all, and that kind of shows a lot in this film. Is he's really going for it with this. He's really doing something like very aesthetic. Like he's not like, because I feel like he has a kind of direction for himself in mind, that he's not going to get bogged down in like, I have to build a world and I have to make it kind of legit and I have to really sell this, which I feel like
Well,
is
you have to handhold the audience.
yeah, like he's not really like doing that. Um and then I think for a while he kind of does in his own mold. He just kind of gives the people what they want in varying kind of degrees. You
Well,
know,
this is the
it's like an
tension in Ridley's
audience.
career, right? Is that on the one hand he's a very refined and like somewhat elitist figure as an artist. On the other
Yeah.
hand, he's also a salesman, and he's
Yeah.
also,
Yes,
he
completely.
produces his own work, and he's also this commercial figure,
Mm.
and he's never afraid to always mix those. Where I
Yeah.
think a lot of people would, a lot of other people as directors, they're like, well, here's my, here's the ones for them, and then here's my real shit. Really doesn't do that,
Yeah.
right? There's no
No.
ones for them. I can't remember,
Yeah.
and I don't know. Like none of his films feel like that.
No. I think secretly Blade Runner is, but that's probably a whole different that's a whole different thing. I
Well,
think
that's what I'm saying though. I think like the fact that he made Blade Runner and made this, and these are such extravagant productions.
mm,
I feel like it put him on a path to be like, all right, but I gotta make movies that are actually like
yeah.
sellable.
Yeah, I think he would probably define himself, and I don't mean this reductively, but like as kind of a confectioner. Like he knows what uh people want sweets, but he's gonna give you like, artisan chocolate. Really, he's like gonna make
Yeah,
sweets that are like the best like chocolate you've ever had, like the best kind of
you know
dessert you've
what? I
ever
think you're
eaten.
very right. I agree with
Yeah.
you. In a way, that's almost like what separates him from Kubrick, who I think
Yeah.
is very close in spirit to Ridley in a lot of ways,
Yeah.
but I don't think Kubrick ever really compromised in his movies. I think he made a
No.
deliberate career out of not doing that. And he took his time, and he was very, you know, he was very careful. And you look at him and guys like David Lean, right? These are guys who, once they got into their, their most famous periods as artists, they made films like, once every couple of years, if at that.
Yeah.
Ridley's never done that. Ridley just palms fucking shit out. He's a
He
factory.
really is nonstop.
Um, and so I think in a way he's almost like, not that those guys weren't workaholics, but Ridley is like, uh, maybe like an authentic like workaholic. Like he just can't help himself. There was
Yeah.
a in the recent, I forget it was a writer GQ, but there was like some profile of him where he
Mm.
talks about he talks about like, if I wasn't working all the time, I'd be depressed or something.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
I do feel like that's true. I wonder,
Yeah.
some people, they're so productive because they're just like, well, I wouldn't know what to do with myself if I wasn't doing this.
Yeah. Well, like Blade Runner is, and I don't mean to be like glib sort of psychologically, but it is like very coded his sort of grief outlet for like losing his brother at the same time he starts working on it. Like it's kind I know he would never ever admit to that openly, but I do feel like he took that film on which he'd initially rejected because he needed something to do to like offload his grief and like that whole sense of like a kind of like memory sadness, like remembering things and being sad about them, like that process of grief is like laced into Blade Runner. Like it is the kind of fabric on which that film is kind of, it's the canvas on which that film is kind of painted.
Well, and with
um
Tony, I think you see it very explicitly in The
yeah,
Counselor, in Exodus,
yeah,
and
yeah,
I
yeah,
think in Alien Covenant. I think Alien Covenant,
yeah,
there's
interesting.
an interesting reading of that movie where you have these two androids, and
Oh,
one of
for
them is
sure,
like
yeah.
this, like, like refined intellectual, and the other one is designed to be like, the commercial safe, not challenging version of that.
Yeah,
And like, not to say that like that's not what really probably thought of Tony, but I think
yeah,
there is a reading where, you have these two artists, and, Ridley always tried to merge the highbrow with the, I mean, I don't like using the brow terms, but like he tried to merge
I get, yeah,
these like very refined aesthetics with populist cinema. And I think
yeah,
Tony was much more successful in just taking cinema to be his own thing. And there was never an imposition, right? Like after The Hunger, he doesn't make ones for me. There's none of these like art film type movies in Tony's
yeah,
filmography. And so
yeah,
he just turned popular cinema into what he needed it to be. Whereas I think Ridley's always a little bit antagonistic to what,
yeah,
the quote unquote what the market wants. Like he doesn't make the ones for them because he's always tried to mold what is for them into what is for him.
yeah. I think the Kubrick influence is really hard to overstate because he always talks about the influence of Kubrick and he always draws on the kind of approach, like the high art, but he wants that high art to work in a studio sense. And I think he would hate to be thought of, probably in a similar way with Kubrick, is he would hate to be thought of as in the new Hollywood mold as a kind of maverick who
Yeah,
overspends and goes over budget and is not reliable as a
because he
kind of
was known as that.
because he, yeah, but I think he hates that. I think he, at a certain point, probably after this flopped real hard, is he wanted to do something like lower budget. I have to stop what I'm saying right now because this laugh is like one of the all-time greatest evil laughs, and the fucking sound and the look on Tim Curry's face. Anyway, sorry. Um, I had to note that because
I love
it's
all these
like,
like monks like wrestling with the
yeah.
unicorn. They look like the monks from like. Have you ever seen the cover for the video game The Mystery of the Druids?
Oh yeah, I used to have that game.
Oh, you did? Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay,
man.
can you tell me what was the mystery of the Druids?
Oh,
Tell
I have
me.
no idea. Fuck knows. Who cares?
Fuck,
Who cares?
it's still a mystery.
I remember basically nothing about it apart from that cover, which I thought was um, fucking brilliant, and also scared the hell out of me as well. It had that sort of King Crimson, like scary, screamy face
It
kind of
did,
look
yeah.
about it, and that shit always got under my skin, but in a good way. Um, so it was, yeah, the Ridley tension is always about like working within commercial demand because he's a commercial director. Like that's his background, and he likes to be thought of as a dependable kind of like the safest pair of hands. But at the same time, he has to do things his own way. Like he has to, but he wants to be lavish and he wants to be
Well, yeah,
um
I think
you
what
know
he wanted to avoid was the Michael Cimino Heaven's Gate thing, where it's
yeah,
you'll never work in
completely.
this town again kind of thing. And I think he
Yeah,
did come perilously close to being that kind of
yeah.
guy several times.
Massively. And now I mean like I think the only true, maybe not true win, but like just the absolute meeting of all those things that he's ever had is probably Gladiator. That's the one that was
I
like
think so.
the massive box office success, massive like Oscar winner, like it looks incredible and he really puts a lot of himself in that. And is also it just plays to the
And
kind
I
of
think it's safe to say
plays
that
to the
Russell Crowe
gravity
is
of
like
the
the figure in his cinema. Like Crowe and Fassbender feel like the Ridley avatars in many ways.
yeah, yeah, completely. Um, so it's interesting, like there's really only one film in a very lengthy filmography where he's just like won it completely, and it's like right in the middle of his filmography. It's like this
Yeah.
kind
Well,
of
I think it's the key point where like Ridley went from like just not just another director, but from a director to one of the directors. I think,
yeah,
um,
yeah.
and I think he very much recognizes that, which is why he's doing Gladiator 2 in an effort to probably like cement that legacy.
Yeah, I feel like now he's at a point where he's just like he knows that his name being on a film is not gonna guarantee people will go and see it. So he's just making as much as he can, like completely non-stop, just so that no one will stop him. Like he'll make 2 films a year just so that some profit is being made somewhere, so he can just keep going, like, and he can keep making them. And I kind of admire that in a way. I mean, there are very mixed results in there, and I do think the visuals have suffered in like the last kind of 10 years. Like everything, there's not like, excuse the pun as we're watching this film, but the darkness is missing from a lot
Well,
of the
he's not
dark
lush
areas.
anymore, and
Yeah.
I think that's okay. I understand what you're saying. I don't mind it as much because I think he's just eased into like his work with Darius Wolski. I think is incredible, and I think they do
Mm.
amazing work. Like, is it this? No, it's not. But I think it's its own thing, and I feel I don't know. In a way, it's like he's almost settled into something that he like. It feels very much like his palette, whereas he's very much a pioneer of neo expressionism, but there are films which look like Blade Runner. There are films which look like Alien.
Mm.
These movies are of a piece with the movement. Whereas I feel like when he gets into his later career, the Ridley movies start looking like just pure Ridley movies, and there's no one that's really
Yeah.
trying to ape that. It's kind of like with Clint Eastwood, where um, after a certain point, like all Clint films, they just like become a part of like the Clint aesthetic fully emerges, and you're like, all right, like no one is making a film that looks like 1517 to Paris, and
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
there's a unique quality to it. Oh god, this fucking shit with the swords. It's like, again, this is
Mm.
like Dark Souls, right?
I mean, like, I really have a hard time, like, trying to understand why this film doesn't at least have a bigger following. Like, it kind of just hits all the beats, and the design is kind of speaks for itself. And we've obviously gone into great detail about it here, but like, it's like, what don't, what is missing from? I mean, I know there are things like on a mass appeal sense that it's like not doesn't quite have the depth and it doesn't have the world building, but it like who fucking cares? It's like look at like what you've got. Like I don't really understand why this isn't a bigger
Well,
deal, but
here's an idea, right? I think this hits a weird spot, right? For the Tom Cruise fans, it's an outlier.
yeah,
For Ridley fans, I think it's like his only quote unquote kids movie, so I think it gets seen as an
yeah,
outlier. Um, and for like the '80s fantasy people, I think they have it. I think they very much like this movie. Uh,
Yeah.
so I don't know. Like it's just it's an odd duck to be sure, but I think an essential one. I don't think you can really understand Willie as an artist without like understanding the lengths that he went to in making this
Mm,
type of film, and why he doesn't make these films anymore because it's like he just went too hard and the studio system
yeah.
could not handle it.
You
So you
can't
were
do
spending $25 million to put like buckets of glitter on Tom Cruise
you can't do this and a Blade Runner like twice
back to
every
back.
year.
Yeah,
Like you cannot do like this is I think the time between it's like 3 years between this and Blade Runner. Like after this, it's like this is sort of the period where he's like really just sinking into something,
well,
like
this is him.
disappearing
His is
into a
him
film.
cashing in the Alien check, right? This is like I made
Yeah,
Alien. I made a bunch of fucking money. You're gonna let me do what I want to do, and
yeah,
then
yeah, yeah,
after these, they're like, actually, see though,
yeah,
this is almost like a Spielbergian thing. Like the light
yeah,
bounces off all these mirrors and
yeah.
vanquishes him, and I don't know. Like it reminds me of like that part in War of the Worlds where like they showed the mirror to the alien.
Oh yeah, yeah. I forget about War of the Worlds. That's a very
Underrated.
underappreciated film.
Yeah,
That is a
great movie.
disturbing film as well.
Oh, scary.
Um,
Yeah, very scary.
really, like I remember seeing that, and I guess it was just that. I mean, it's this is not a very incisive observation because it's very well documented the sort of post 9/11 kind of mood, but like
What's
just
Ridley's
being a
post nine
viewer
eleven
in that.
movie?
Oh, it's no Black Hawk Down is pre nine
It's
eleven, but
pre. He
it's
made it before.
I think it's Matchstick Men, so there's no real
No, no, not. I don't mean like literally, but like, what's does Ridley have a 9/11 movie? I don't think he does. I mean, I guess it's Body
I
of
would say
Lies,
Kingdom of
but yeah.
Heaven. I would say Kingdom of
Oh,
Heaven.
Kingdom of yeah,
Is
yeah.
it
That's probably
I
right.
mean that's the sort of you know, the two kind of the Middle Eastern sort of divide and the war in Iraq is all kind of like is all over that fucking film, right?
Dude, this shit
And
fucking rules. He just like goes. I mean, again, echoes of Alien. Where he just gets flung out into space.
yeah, yeah. See, I love this kind of detail that like
He
there's
sends out
just a kind of
sparks.
there's the there's a star void which is ever present in this guy's house that you know,
But it's
God
like
forbid they'll ever get
underground.
flung into it. Yeah, it's like it's an underground thing, but it's like that to me is the essence of like really strong
Well,
fantasy. It's
I like
like
that though. It's like the
it's the
internal world
unexpected.
suddenly like voids into the absolute exterior world.
Yeah, yeah.
Dude, Tom Cruise's hair in this movie is so pretty. He looks beautiful.
Strong. It's
It's
really
it's like
strong.
the proto Mission Impossible 2 hair.
Yeah. There's a there's got to be a good study out there of just like box office success versus Tom Cruise's hair
Tom
because
Cruise's hair. Well,
I mean Mission
there's a
Impossible
podcast that just like constantly talks about his hair length,
2,
which I appreciate.
he's gone
Um,
through all of them.
yeah, yeah, he's done the whole thing. I don't know. I generally prefer. I like when he has longer hair. I think he looks amazing.
Yeah.
Like Last
Yeah, it's
Samurai to me, that's the best he's ever looked. He looks so
that is a
hot.
good that's a really good look, and the beard as well, like facial hair, like a bit more outdoorsy
He needs to grow
is,
the beard again. He looks good.
he does. He needs to bring beard back from Mission Impossible.
Oh my god, this music. This is the most 80s shit ever.
Yeah. Get John Anderson on there and yeah. See, like, this is if you were to attribute this music, if you've never seen Legend and you heard this song and you were to attribute it to a genre, you would immediately think of this type of film, but like,
Yes. Yeah. It's
why
so of
outside
there.
of
Well, it just
yeah.
I think it's like the shimmering quality to the music. It's almost like Cocteau Twins.
Yeah, and as I feel like obviously a lot of fantasy films had songs like what's the one The Neverending Story has that like song, like that fucking
Yes, that's right.
theme song, which is very similar, like sort of
Yeah.
fantasy. When you start bringing synths into popular music in a big, big way, like you open up this window of just introducing the fantastical because keyboards are all about like dreamy, sort of otherworldly sounds, you know, like guitars are very kind of macho and like entrenched in a kind of 60s ideal, like a sort of post-war thing. But then like 80s synths are sort of like inherently fantastical.
Yeah, I just think that, there was no barometer for like what tasteful synths are, which I think
Yeah,
now like there's like a certain genre of what that looks like that
yeah.
that we still see in popular music. But back then they were just like, no, there's no rules. Just do whatever you want.
It's hard to hear this music and imagine that it was like genuinely revolutionary at the time. Like these
Oh, it
sounds
was. Yeah.
had not been like they were so brand new, and it felt like brand new, and it was gonna kind of be the flagship for
Or
like
take it
80s
over.
music.
I love this. They're just running to the sunset. Now in the directors, this doesn't happen. In the directors, they
Yeah,
part where it gives it a
yeah,
much more melancholy tone. I don't know. I like
yeah.
both endings, but I don't know, it's hard to say which one I prefer. I mean, this
I
is
mean,
like
this
the
is
most
very
80s thing ever. Like just running into the sunset, this music playing. Yeah.
yeah, really, really crescendos. Yeah, I mean, this is your arcade video game ending right here.
That's
This is
right.
like
Yeah.
you
You
beat the
just beat the
final boss.
boss.
You won the day. Like you don't need any of that kind of like tragic fairy tale book
Well, it's
shit.
almost like here, like they're exiting the fantasy world, whereas in the directors, it's more like one of them stays in it and then the other leaves, and
Yeah.
like there's like a much more of a duality to there. Yeah, I'll admit it. I actually I completely changed my mind during the course of this commentary. Yeah, I prefer the directors.
Yeah, same.
Well, I guess we'll have to record for that one too. Nah,
Let's
not
do it.
really.
No, I do still prefer the directors, but there is a quality in the theatrical which I am like. I do think it doesn't feel like there are things lost which I miss and I
I
need
think if the
in the
theatrical
final cut.
had the good color grading, I would prefer it. But
Yeah. Um, there, I think there is like something like I feel like the directors is what he originally wanted it to be, and
yes.
he goes sort of like there are demands within the theatrical cut which he willingly obeys and uses to construct a different version. And so
Yeah.
there is this intention that underscores the theatrical that is this isn't a compromise. I'm not just taking them out. Like the theatrical Blade Runner, for example, is a compromise, and I know he's like hating it. Like when I watch that
I'm
film,
gonna
I
watch it
feel
soon.
like
I can't wait to see it.
yeah,
I got like the complete like Blu-ray set of like that has all
excellent.
the different cuts on it, and
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
gonna want to watch that theatrical for the first time. It's gonna be interesting,
It would be very. I mean, it just feels to me like he's not enjoying himself.
and
Like
that's when I
watching that
knew I
film.
became the Blade Runner.
Yeah, I mean, literally in that sense. But like underneath everything that's going on in the film, it just feels like he's being kind of sanded
Yeah.
down. Whereas in this, I don't feel that. Like I feel like
No.
he's working to make something that works on a very kind of like on a broad sense.
Yeah,
You know.
I think both cuts work, just in different ways. Like, yeah, this one, the theatrical feels a little bit more abstract and hallucinatory, and
Yeah,
then the director's feels like more fairy tale-y.
but I love it. It's like one of my top four Ridleys. Like for
Oh,
it's so
interesting.
flawed.
Top four, really.
It's so flawed and so. But there is something about the imagery alone which has just embedded.
I don't think it's flawed. Like, what's the flaw in this movie?
Well, I mean, it isn't like especially. I mean, yeah, I think you've made the very good point that it is a kids' film and
I mean,
that
on its own
it
terms,
works
right?
for
Like,
kids.
what doesn't it accomplish?
I mean, yeah, completely. I mean, I've shown this to people and they've really hated it. Like, it is not hard to find someone who just will not get on board with this. Even like very fantasy pilled people are just like, do not go in for it. And I've
Oh, those people suck.
unfortunately,
Those are not good
yeah.
people. Come on, if you're a fantasy fan,
It's
well,
not
come
good.
on, come on.
What more do you need? But for me, it's like just his artistry. It's like it never
This
got better than
Brian
this.
Ferry song at the
I fucking
end.
love it. It's
This
great,
is
man.
from
It's
like
great stuff.
the solo period of Brian Ferry too, where he was just off the reservation.
Yeah, but he wrote some bangers like post
Oh yeah, he's a genius.
post Roxy. He's fucking that output like so good. This song and this is obviously just like a throwaway. I just want to put something on a soundtrack album, but it's great. It's still really good. Um, yeah, love this film. Love both
This
cuts.
guitar, meow meow, so good.
Quality stuff. Um,
Yeah, well,
Oh
legend it
my god.
rules. What can we
It is a
say?
legend.
It
It's a
is it
true
is
legend.
a one of the legends, yes, but also a legend. Uh yeah, that's fucking it.
That's
Um
probably it's probably the shortest podcast you've ever done, maybe? That film is, like, under
maybe
an hour and a half?
until we do a Bud Boddicker movie, which will probably happen.
Like, 60 minutes.
Yeah, yeah, in and out. Now,
Yeah,
I don't know about you. I got this invitation. I'm gonna go hang out with Meg Mucklebones.
it's nice.
I don't think she'll eat me. I think it'll turn out fine. But if she does, uh, you gotta don't help
I
me.
can't
Just leave me
don't help
behind.
you. Just let it
Leave
happen.
me. Just let the fates do what they must.
You don't want me to ride in valorously and, cut her head off?
Well, if you must.